this background report.
China is a nuclear power in both the military and civilian sphere, and President Xi Jinping recognizes that the threat of terrorists getting their hands on nuclear material is going up, not down. In his remarks, he said, looking around the world, the global landscape is going through profound changes unseen in the past. New threats and challenges keep emerging in the security field, and the root causes of terrorism are far from being removed. Nuclear terrorism remains a grave threat to international security. China is making 5 pledges to make sure terrorists cannot get their hands on material to build the ultimate weapon. They are improving nuclear security capacity, promoting less use of highly enriched uranium, strengthening the security of radioactive sources, launching initiatives for nuclear terrorism responses, and sharing nuclear security systems with other countries. On the final day of the summit, world leaders who helped negotiate the landmark deal with Iran over its nuclear program gathered to mark the historical accord and check on progress. China, the US, the Republic of Korea and Japan also used this summit to present a united opposition to the DPRK's. Chinese officials believe this summit
not only gained positive responses from other national leaders, but are also fully reflected in the communiqué of the summit. In particular, the communiqué embodies President Xi's approach to national security and his other ideas. This marks an important contribution made by China and also points out the way to strengthen the international nuclear security architecture in the post-summit era.
While there are many issues that still divide China and the US, ranging from cybersecurity to sovereignty issues in the South China Sea, nuclear security is one issue that can unite both countries. And with the US and China, the 2 biggest nuclear powers here in Washington, it's one issue where they can set an example for the rest of the world. Nathan King, CCTV, at the Nuclear Security Summit in Washington, D.C.
Now let's talk about the pressing issue of nuclear security around the globe. Gentlemen, we know that as the fastest growing, the largest developing country in the world, and also the fastest country that has the fastest growth of nuclear power in the world, China has participated in all 4 nuclear security summits. Chinese President Xi Jinping attended the 3rd one in The Hague and the 4th one, just the concluded one, in Washington, D.C. His predecessor, Hu Jintao, attended the 1st one in Washington, D.C. and the 2nd one in Seoul. And this year, President Xi Jinping also gave a keynote speech at the opening plenary of the summit. So let's start with the big picture here. What role China has played in strengthening nuclear security around the globe? Professor?
To my observation, China has played some very important roles in several regards. Firstly, China provide big political support to this international effort. China works closely with other countries to reach consensus on nuclear security. And secondly, China successfully developed some bilateral and multilateral cooperation with other countries on nuclear security summit. And thirdly, China successfully worked with some countries and provided some technical assistance to some countries, and all these significantly promote our effort for better nuclear security arrangement.
Mr. Zhou Ding, what's your take?
My take is that China's participation on this very crucial international issue has changed significantly since President Obama gave his speech in 2009. China now is assuming its place as a world leader, not only an economic leader, but a political leader as well. And China is more fully participating on this issue and providing leadership. I think China played a great part in reaching the agreement between the United States and Iran, for instance. Mm-hmm. And I think that China is doing many other things. For instance, establishing a national center for excellence on nuclear security issues. I think China is now taking its rightful place where it should be and is to be commended.
Well, gentlemen, China has a very good record in nuclear security. And in his keynote speech at the Nuclear Security Summit, Chinese President Xi Jinping urged countries around the world, and I'm quoting, to increase national input and expand international cooperation so as to further firm up the global nuclear security architecture. So, gentlemen, what are the basic elements of this architecture, Professor?
Basically, there are three elements. Firstly, domestic law and implementation. For example, in the last several years, China has issued some very important laws to regulate our work on nuclear security. And secondly, bilateral cooperation, as the gentleman just said, the Center for Excellence is a product of U.S.-China cooperation. And thirdly, we have international multilateral cooperation. For example, we have a lot of work done, on the leadership of International Atomic Energy Agency. They organize some multilateral cooperation. China is a very active member of all these multilateral efforts.
So, Mr. Zoding, the United States is the world's largest nuclear power and the only country that has used nuclear weapons in real warfare. So what does the U.S. have to offer in this regard?
I think the U.S., because it's been through that experience of using nuclear weapons, and because, along with Russia, is the largest stockpiler of nuclear materials and weapons, has an important leadership role to play. But the U.S. can't do this alone. So I think one of the great developments this year that's come out of this process has been the establishment of a nuclear security dialogue to complement the economic and strategic dialogue bilaterally that's been established. I feel many people badmouth in America, badmouth China and talk about it being an enemy and so on. But I think China and America, we're frenemies. We're friends and enemies on certain issues. But I think on the nuclear security issue that we're friends because we can cooperate. And institutionalizing this dialogue will mean that the lines of communication are open. And I think that's very important.
Well, interestingly, Mr. Zoding, you mentioned Russia, which is absent from this time's Nuclear Security Summit. So, gentlemen, do you think a nuclear security issue will eventually fall into power politics in international order, Professor?
Actually, the United States and Russia began their effort right at the end of Cold War. The United States realized that the fissile materials, some sensitive fissile materials in Russia may be in a danger. So the United States provided money and technical assistance to Russia to secure their fissile materials. So they had very good cooperation for many years. And still, my belief is that Russia support the effort of nuclear security.
But President Putin is not there.
Right. I think the problem is that right now the United States and Russia have a not so stable relation. So Russia does not like nuclear security summit, but they like nuclear security. So Russia said that they will continue to support world work of nuclear security, especially nuclear security effort organized by IAEA. So we should not assume that Russia does not like nuclear security. They like nuclear security.
So it's just the power politics, you think?
Right.
Do you agree, Mr. Zoding?
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's unfortunate that President Putin is not there. But I suspect in the months and years to come that Russia will be an active participant. If this is going to work, they have to be, because along with the United States, they're the largest, the other largest country involved in this issue. So yes, I think it's just, I think it's Putin's peaked a little bit now, and it's he's mad at the United States. But I think this issue is too important to forego.
So let's put power politics aside and talk about cooperation. You both mentioned the commencement of this Center of Excellence for Nuclear Security. It's a cooperation between China and the United States. Look at the functions of this center. It looks like a training center, isn't it? So is it only a training-focused mechanism, or it's a kind of example that can be learned from for many other countries?
It is a training center, that's true. It also has some other functions. For example, it will be a place for the Chinese and American scientists to work together to improve some technology and facilities for nuclear security. It will be also a place for the two countries to show their new progress in this regard. Actually, this is a product of the U.S.-China cooperation on nuclear security, but it is not new. Our cooperation, the cooperation between China and the United States began in 1995. I was one of some people who were involved in the first effort in 1995. I'm so happy to see that today we can see the product.
So let's talk about China's own development in nuclear security. Right before the Nuclear Security Summit, China has announced the successful implementation of this miniature neutron sources reactor, which is to replace highly enriched uranium to low enriched uranium. Does this mean the future of nuclear power use, Professor?
Actually, these reactors are not for nuclear power. These reactors are very small reactors for civilian use. For example, many countries need isotopes for medical use. These isotopes have very short life. They cannot buy. They do not have time to ship these isotopes back to their countries. They have to produce these isotopes by themselves by using these small nuclear reactors. So these nuclear reactors are used for producing isotopes and some other products. Originally, we use highly enriched uranium for these small reactors, but terrorists may want to attack this highly enriched uranium. So the idea is
and it can be weaponized in an easier way for terrorists.
That's the point. That's the concern. So the idea is that we replace this highly enriched uranium with low enriched uranium to reduce the risk of terrorist attack. So China has provided technical assistance to other countries, and China pledged to do so again for some other countries.
Well, Mr. Zoding, what's the trend of, from your observation, what's the trend of civilian nuclear power use in the U.S.?
Well, we had the unfortunate experience with 3 Mile Island, but I think given the fact that oil prices are very low, and the fact that oil is inexpensive and that solar and wind are expensive, that nuclear will continue to be one of the tools in our arsenal. And I personally believe that nuclear energy is quite safe. It's not foolproof, but when the plants are safely operated, I think it's safe and efficient, and it foregoes a lot of the environmental negatives that some other forms of energy have.
And we'll talk about right after this break. And you're watching Dialogue on CCTV News. We'll be right back after this. Now let's continue our discussion on nuclear security. So, gentlemen, let's pick up from where we left a minute ago. So, talking about if nuclear power is the safest form of energy. Professor Li, is it?
Generally speaking, nuclear energy is safe if we consider how much energy it can produce and how many casualties it would produce in average.
But why does this constant media myth on the dangers of nuclear power?
I think the reason is that for most people, we cannot see where the dangers are. That's the problem. It's not like a coal combustion. We see the fire. We know where's the danger. But for most people, we cannot see the nuclear radiation. So the concern is that the nuclear radiation may hurt us, but we do not know. That is a general worry. But as President Xi said, that we need to be rational on this issue.
And now this issue is also intertwined with terrorism, because the latest findings in the investigation into the Brussels attacks shows that a suspect has surveillance footage of a very senior nuclear official in Belgium, and they try to attack the nuclear power plant to cause a very mass destruction around the country. So, from the result of this time's nuclear security summit, do you think all the major players are on the same page in fighting nuclear terrorism, Mr. Zoding?
Well, I think it depends how you define major players. I mean, certainly China's a major player, Russia's a major player, US
and the United States.
Okay, is a major player. But if you look at some of the other countries, especially...
And Britain, France are also nuclear countries.
They're nuclear countries as well. I think they may be on the same page, but I think their level of security needs to be enhanced. You can never have enough security. But I worry about some other countries, like your neighbors, India and Pakistan, for instance. And of course, we all worry about DPRK, that was the 800-pound gorilla in the room at the concluded summit. So it just depends on the commitment of those nations. And I some of them have the resources, and all of them, I think, except maybe DPRK, have the desire.
I think you're talking about proliferation rather than terrorism, although those two are connected.
Okay,
right?
That's true. But I think with regard to terrorism in countries like some of your neighbors, like India and Pakistan, where...
So let's get back to terrorism. How dire the situation is of a terrorist nuclear attack, Mr.
Actually, there are four kinds of nuclear terrorism. One is to steal a nuclear bomb. The second is to steal fissile material and produce a bomb. I think that this is a major concern of the United States. And the third is to attack a nuclear facility. That's what we saw in the story you just mentioned. And the fourth is to steal radiological materials and produce a dirty bomb. I think the Americans worry more about fissile material and worry more about that terrorist group may produce a atomic bomb by using the fissile material they steal. And China, Japan, and South Korea worry more about attack against nuclear facilities and radiological materials. So
are they on the same page? Let's go back to the question.
Not quite.
No?
Not quite. But they have a consensus that we should fight against nuclear terrorism. But their priorities are not quite exactly the same.
So people so each country can mind their own business?
Each country works on its own agenda. At the same time, they understand that international cooperation is so important. So they do not put their differences, as a high priority.
So let's talk about the international overseeing mechanism on nuclear materials. And leaders attending this time's nuclear security summit have mentioned this many times. It seems a big problem with the current mechanism. Do you think so?
You mean fissile materials?
No, overseeing of nuclear materials, tracking nuclear materials, this whole system.
Right. In most cases, fissile materials are in the country who own them. But in some cases, they are in other countries. For example, when you export a nuclear reactor to some other countries, and you have your fissile material there. So in that case, there are several examples. One is Japan. Japan borrowed some fissile materials from United States, UK, and France, and used that fissile materials for their research. So. United States. So there, apparently, it is much more difficult to count your fissile materials not on your territory, right? It's more difficult to count, your money in others' pocket.
I think this is where exactly the IAEA comes in. So how do you view the UN nuclear watchdog's role at the current stage?
I think they're doing a relatively good job, but I think that a lot more can be done to try to compel.
Like what?
Well, I think that there are many mechanisms in place for tracking these materials, for doing a high level of inspections in countries, and I think the Iran-U.S. agreement points to a regime of inspection at a very high level. We have to have more of this, and the IAEA is obviously of this effort, but they're only as good as their member states because they don't have significant enforcement mechanisms. So I quite worry about this, and I worry about leakage from the system of fissionable materials. I think I wouldn't be surprised, unfortunately, especially if a dirty bomb ended up being exploded somewhere.
So you think the situation is that dire?
I think it's potentially that dire.
And it's a result, obviously, from proliferation of nuclear technology and materials. So let's talk about the DPRK. Is there a way to stop the country to develop a nuclear weapon at the current stage, Professor?
There are two concerns here. One is that DPRK will continue to produce more fissile materials for their weapons and produce more nuclear weapons and weaponize their nuclear devices. That's one concern. That is the concern of nuclear proliferation. At the same time, there's another concern. People do not say that much, but it is a serious concern. That is, the North Korean nuclear scientists, engineers, soldiers around these nuclear materials facilities, they may not feel happy. They may not feel confidence in their regime, or they may attack their nuclear facilities, nuclear materials, because they are our neighbor. So if they bring, some nuclear material or do some, smuggling kind of thing, that would be a big threat to us. We do not have much discussion on this. We should, have some preparation for that. That is a nuclear security concern.
But the latest development from the DPRK is that the country's ambassador just said that the opportunities for reopening the denuclearization talks has gone. What's your take on this?
I really worry about the DPRK because they're rightfully called the Hermit Kingdom. And the country is constantly accusing the United States and its so-called puppet South Korea as the biggest threat. That's the reason for their country to develop a nuclear bomb. So what's your take on this? Is that true? No, I don't think it's true at all. I think it's a paranoia of a hermit regime and a regime that uses that to control its own people. But I worry about it because just last week the Pentagon announced that the DPRK has developed some new missile capabilities that, while untested, are theoretically possible that they deliver a nuclear warhead to the United States. So we have to worry about this. But I think a lot of the responsibility depends on China because China is the country for which DPRK is a client state. And so if you can't control them, I don't know who can. We've had great cooperation in the Group of Six, but we need to redouble our efforts, and especially now that this the Nuclear Security Summit is not going to make on this issue.
I think, again, we're going back to the problem of the current overseeing mechanism around the world, because do you think the power of the IAEA is strong enough to carry out inspections and to make information transparent?
IAEA is a functional organization, so it does not have the power to produce new law. Their function is to implement law. So we need international society to produce new laws. But IAEA could produce some norms, some working manual, and that kind of thing. Working level guidance. They can do that. I think they have been doing that very well. We should trust them. IAEA has a lot of technical expertise, and they have a lot of very good workers. So we should trust them.
So let's go back to the mechanism of nuclear security summit. It has concluded, along with President Barack Obama's term in office. So do you think it's a personal political bid of President Barack Obama, or it will lead to something new and consistent?
I think so. Actually, President Obama.
But there's no word at all on a future similar mechanism like this.
Actually, President Obama, said two things. One is nuclear weapon-free world.
Which is not realized at all.
You are right. That is far. So we can. We like to see that, but we have not yet made enough effort for that. But for nuclear security, that is the second point he raised. I think in the last several years we have made a lot of progress. We have developed some very important bilateral and multilateral cooperation. We have successfully replaced the highly enriched uranium from some reactors. We have removed some sensitive fissile materials from some
So you
countries.
think international cooperation is very important for a mechanism like this in the future?
Right.
Do you think so, Mr. Zodi?
I think so, but I'm doing a lot of worrying tonight on the program. And one of the things I worry about is if there is going to be a President Donald Trump in America, a candidate who said that South Korea should get its own nuclear forces, Japan should get its own nuclear. I really worry about that because it really upsets the apple cart that's see into the future. But I really worry about this because we need to have a regime that controls these things well and oversees it well. And